Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is the Envision Speaker Series. Now, I'm going to get this. I'm going to try to get this. I'm going to get first names because we're all doctors here. And so I got the first part right. Dr. Wayne, Dr. Barb, welcome to the conversation. And so typically, as you already know, so I'm going to allow you to introduce yourselves, full name, please, and then tell our audience what brings you to this conversation. But before we even talk about what that is, let's talk about what we're going to converse about. And so we're going to talk about how to level change appropriately and in a way that's going to benefit everybody who's part of that conversation. So Dr. Wayne, Dr. Barb, welcome to the Envision Speaker Series. Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
Dr. Keith. I'll go first. Uh, I'm Dr. Wayne Benenson. My degree is in education. I have 50 glorious years of teaching from preschool to grad school. And instead of telling you where I got my degrees and where I taught, I want to begin by saying why I drifted into education. And I think I was trying to resolve an owie. Dr. Barb and I get really basic and talk about physical and emotional and psychological owies. And when we do that, it frees up a space for other people to talk about theirs without pity. Just that's what we're dealing with, and how can we get past that? So mine was being bullied as a kid. I was small. I was I wasn't obese, but I was portly. I wasn't particularly athletic, and I was an easy mark for the kids in school. And that had a really strong effect on me. My parents were great. They said, stand up for yourself and go find an adult to help you. They did all the right things, but I was scared of my shadow. And I wanted to not only get out from under that rock, but help other people get out from under that rock. And that's what led me to my present career with Dr. Barb with Great Masters. And that's my short bio.
Well, Dr. Wayne, I appreciate that. And I'm going to dive into that just a bit because we need to figure out what's going on there. Because I kind of share, I'm all of 5'6", and I've been shrinking since high school. And I
Height
was
challenge. Is that what the word is? Height challenge.
I am height challenged since I was so and I went to and so we're all in the short stature here. And so growing up, and I went to Catholic school, a parochial school, and so they always lined us up shortest to tallest.
Oh.
And so I was always either the first or second
Oh,
person
no,
to
no, no. This is worse. On picture day, I was the only guy in the front row with all the girls. All the dudes were in the back row.
I feel it. I totally feel the pain. And so Dr. Barb, who are you and what brings you to this conversation?
Thank you for having us. I'm already having lots of fun on this. So let's see. I love Dr. Wayne. Thanks for sharing your story of kind of origins. I started my career working as a therapist, and I think part of it, my mom was a social worker, and I was kind of drawn in that field. I saw how she worked with people, and I just love people, and I love being around people, and I love talking to people. And so I've worked with people my whole career as a therapist for a long time. Then I got into doing a lot of work for the court systems, mediation and parent coaching and leadership work. So I do a lot of leadership coaching with executives. And the thing, like my origin story, I think about in listening to Dr. Wayne too, is I always felt invisible. I wasn't bullied, but I was invisible. And I was a very quiet child, and I was very studious. Like a lot of my friends will say, like, you were so quiet, you were so smart, but you were so quiet. And I just never really found my voice. And I think when I started working, I love working with kids. That's really always been my sweet spot. But when I started working with kids, I easily spotted what I call the underdogs, the kids that just were behind. And it's funny because I used to have an underdog lunchbox. There was a show with Underdog, and I had the Underdog lunchbox, which is quite appropriate. And so so my, like, all growing up too was I wanted to be seen and I wanted to be visible. And so a lot of my career, I've worked with people who haven't felt seen, or they don't really realize what amazing gifts they bring and their strengths. And so I love helping people just bring that stuff to the surface and have awareness of all these wonderful qualities that they do have, because a lot of people somewhere along the way were, you know, shown that they didn't matter, or that, they didn't have much worth, even though they do. People are worthy and have value. So I think that's kind of my story of where I am now. And so I love just really helping people find all those sweet, juicy, traits that they have, and bring those out and share those with the world. So that's part of who I am. And I love having these conversations. Dr. Wayne and I really enjoy meeting new people and, sharing our gifts with others. So thank you for having us.
Well, absolutely. And so far, let's get this conversation. Let's go back a bit, because we're all sharing stories of, you know, growing up is a challenge. And so whether we have the greatest of parents, or I don't want to say it, the worst of parents, every child
Yeah.
sees themselves in a specific space. And so whether we're height challenged or academically challenged, or we just see ourselves as misfits or invisible, and then we have to find our way through life. And life then presents hurdles, obstacles, whatever that looks like. And it's people such as ourselves who have kind of been who have been able to navigate through or past or over or under that, and then say, I wish I had somebody to kind of hold my hand throughout the entire process. And for me, it was, one, two suicide attempts and then a heart attack. But in all of that, I did find my cheerleaders. I was able to find my story. I was able to develop my narrative. Thus, these conversations exist. And so, with all that, let's bring out your story so that we understand, our audience understands how the two of you, one, help other people, and how the two of you work together to help other people. Who wants to start that conversation?
Barb, you, or do you
Dr.
want me to
Wayne?
go?
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Wayne. Yeah.
Um, that's not a 25-word response, Dr. Keene. I'll give you a story. And what Dr. Barb and I are all about is changing stories, or more precisely, letting go of stories that are no longer useful, that at one time had to be useful. Maybe survival depended on it, depending on what that owie was from your childhood. And my story was I developed a very flexible and cutting mouth. I was kind of like Dr. Barr, I was kind of a shy kid. And yet in my family, I had a history of just cracking people up. I had fabulous one-line singers, and getting my mother to pee in her pants was like the best thing going. And I was good at it. She just had to excuse herself, go to the bathroom a lot. But I could never take that out of the house. There was a divide there that was huge. So here's my story. Sometime during my freshman year, early freshman high school year, um, apparently for the gangs of that time, you had to pick on someone and beat them up to be a part of this particular gang. So I was chosen because I looked like an easy mark. And I was taking a bus to and from school. And on the bus, there might have been maybe 15 kids. But on this one afternoon, the whole bus was filled, 75 people, because the word got around. There's going to be a fight. And I was so dense. I was so innocent. I had no idea that I was the object of why the bus was full. So the bus emptied when we got to my stop, and the driver was happy. He could go. He didn't care. So we went up a little bit to this vacant lot, and everyone, it was very ritualistic. They formed a little circle, and me and the dude who was trying to get points, and he said, take the first punch. And without thinking, I ended up saying, I don't punch anything but one-liners. And that started me. I just started teasing him and putting him down in ways that everyone in the circle started to laugh. The same kind of laugh I recognized from my mom. And after about 5 minutes of this, I said, all right, everyone, raise your hand. How many say I'm the winner? And everyone put their hand up, dispersed. That's when I found my voice, that I had the power, the gift of gab. Well, I was frightened shitless, excuse my language, but it allowed me, this other persona that was in me to come up. And that's what I tap into when Dr. Barb and I do our work with other people who are stuck.
I
Nice.
have never been speechless on my own show. Oh my gosh. Because you faced a situation, now I was never ritualistically beat up. I mean, I was teased. I was always the small runt and, like I said, small and shy and all that kind of misfit characteristics. But you found the power. You found your specific power, even if you were scared. Oh my goodness. How many
Yeah.
of us, most of us men now, or boys at the time, have faced that situation and either cried or, just felt powerless in that situation? There are so many of us out there.
One other thing too, I was so self-aware.
Mm,
I was like, who is this person coming up? He was new to me, but not really. I recognized him from being in the house
mhm.
and doing the same shtick on my mom, but I didn't know that he could go public. That was the news for me. And I wanted to break role and just say, pretty cool, aren't I? But I didn't. I stayed in that moment. And one of the kids from the neighborhood who I didn't know that really well said, after people were dispersing and he and I were walking towards my house, he said, gosh, I didn't know you had it in you. I said, neither did I. And that's the joy.
That's beautiful. Dr. Barb, please add to this conversation.
How do I top that? Oh my gosh.
Well, let's start with
You know,
what situation in your life, in your young adult life, was the pivot point? Was that shifting point where, because you said you didn't have a voice, you were invisible, you were shy. Maybe it wasn't even in your
yeah,
young adult life. Maybe it was your adult life that you found your voice.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been my mom passed away a year ago, and so I'm still kind of filtering through just piles of things that I brought home, photos and old school stuff. And Dr. Wayne's been getting pictures of little stories I wrote when I was in first grade or second grade. And so it's been interesting uncovering some of the little beautiful things I found, like, I won a citizenship award and, just all these messages from teachers about, how well I'm doing and, things I didn't remember that it had been so long. But I remember a couple points for me. I think my blossoming happened in college in a lot of ways. In my undergrad, I was a dancer for a long time. I started dancing when I was in kindergarten. And I was always just kind of one of the girls. And I went to a small private liberal arts college. And I've learned through the years that I like a smaller community. And I think that's why I love working with people one-on-one or doing small group work, because I feel like that's kind of where my sweet spot is. So I remember being in college, in undergrad, and in the dance program, all of a sudden, like I was the star. I had a solid background in ballet, and I had another friend, Jennifer, who came with her background in ballet, and all of a sudden, like I started getting like lead roles, and I didn't have any of those things and I grew up in a small town, but it just was a little bit different flavor. So that, like, all of a sudden I just started coming out and realizing, like, oh my gosh, people are noticing me, like this is incredible. And then I can specifically remember a young girl that I worked with when I went to get my one of my master's degrees, and I was doing an internship. And I had this awesome supervisor, and I had this young girl named Mary. I'll never forget her. And my supervisor was going to watch me that day. She was going to come in and observe a session. And I think I had seen Mary a few times already, but Mary was one of those kids that came in with their arms crossed and just like walked in and sat down in the chair and didn't want to talk. And the one day, my supervisor, Bobby, was going to observe. She saw Mary come in the door with her arms folded, and she walked down to the room, and my supervisor looked at me and said, "You got this. I'm not going to sit in today." And I was able to bring that girl out. It was so amazing. Like, I'll never forget her. And this young girl actually wrote me a note that I still have tucked away in a box somewhere, thanking me for working with her. And again, I think she was maybe like 12 or 13 years old. And something in those moments of working with her gave me this confidence and this realization that, oh my gosh, I can do this. That was something I wasn't sure. I didn't feel like I could. How could I be a therapist? I don't know what I'm doing. Just kind of that lack of confidence piece. And for some reason, that one kiddo just kind of launched me. And then thereafter, I started doing creative arts therapies groups with kids, and working with small groups or one-on-one. And I really started to find my rhythm and feel like my voice mattered, and what I was doing and what I was saying actually had importance. So I think some of my kind of coming to, blossoming on my own came kind of in the college, early young adult years, when I started to realize that I was seen and I had value and I could add and enhance other people's lives. So
I talk about three things a lot. I talk about being valuable, meaningful, and purposeful. These are kind of my hashtags for life ever since my second suicide attempt. The two of you have just indicated that there was a point in your life where you were confronted with something, and this happened to be somebody else, and you just gave your story, and Dr. Wayne, you just gave yours, that the pivot was recognized, and you then moved in a different direction. You became confident. You learned to dive into that confidence, and you learned to put your energies towards something that you then saw worked, Dr. Wayne. A little bit different. You got these one-liners, but they were a power. It was your voice. And Dr. Barb, it was then you recognized, ooh, maybe I can be a good therapist. Maybe I can help people in a significant manner. Let's merge both of your stories. Let's merge them together and give us an understanding of how these powers, these superpowers, then become a way of manifesting change or help in those people that you work with.
Dr. Barb talked about being seen. That's so powerful because we live in a world where there are very strict rules about what being seen means. And there's so many impediments to that seenness, whether it's things we can't control, like the color of our skin, religion, or sexual orientation. I think what Dr. Barb and I recognized early on in our relationship, our professional relationship, was this really deep and powerful tension between wanting to be seen for who we are and wanting to fit in
Mm.
to whatever
Mhm.
systems we were in, whether it's work or just walking on the streets, holding hands with our lover, even if that lover is the same gender. So the way we have scripted it in our work is just dealing with both and. There's a tension between our differentness and wanting to fit in, deal with the tension. And I think so many helping modalities do one or the other. They do an either or. So let's get stronger in identifying with whatever that difference is, or let's find ways to smooth out. No, we want the tension because in that tension is your real grit. And we find that when we help people get reoriented towards their grit, fabulous things happen. They start to believe that voice that they have, that seenness that they might have buried since they were preschool.
Mhm.
And that's exciting.
Mm.
That's just thrilling to both of us.
Well, you can't just leave it there. How does this actually work? Because there's so much fear, anxiety, frustration
Sure.
to get to that
Actually,
point.
it's easier than you think. It's hard from the outside looking in, but if there's trust, that's a huge if.
Mhm.
But as I say, the song and dance that Dr. Barb and I have is that we're a male presence, a masculine presence, and a female feminine presence.
Hmm.
So when we have a client who's a guy, they end up hitting on Dr. Barb. There's that tension, that sexual. If it's a woman, they'll hit on me, which is great. But then having the opposite there kind of is the guardrails. So you're not going to get overly saccharine. The key, I think, is we ask our clients, what are you scared of? We go right at the fear thing. What scares the pee out of you? And they'll tell us. They won't tell us. It's like a thing that they're holding on to. They don't want to hold on to anymore.
Mhm.
Our job then, get past that fear, is to say, what are your assets that you don't see? We can see because we're not living with all those people who say, oh, that's silly, or grow up, or whatever was told to you as a young person. And just the reworking of that tension of your differentness and your belongingness helps people develop the resilience and the grit that gets them through.
Well, then let me, Dr. Barb, let me kind of hit on you, not no pun there, and say, how does the balance between the two of you actually do work? Because Dr. Wayne just said he comes at it from a male's perspective. You come at it from a female's perspective. There's male energy, there's female energy, there's male presence, there's female presence. This actually does create a balance and a very significant way of approaching, I don't want to say treatment, but change, because we all innately, even within myself, have male, masculine, female, feminine energies. And so to deny one or the other would be a way of disallowing myself to really come into my own. So, Dr. Barb, how does this balance of energies work with the two of you?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I think the Oscars were last night and dang it all, where's the Barbie movie? I mean, come on. Come on. And so I am a Barbie, right? I'm a leadership Barbie. So the thing that I think when we work with a female client, especially, Dr. Wayne hit the nail on the head with trust. Like just, we're able to kind of build trust out of the gate. And one thing that we do, even in our book, is we share stories. We share our own stories. As a woman, a lot of the clients that we've worked with too have had a lot of trauma. They've had a lot of things happen. And so as a woman, I connect to that. I know what that feels like to be disrespected, to talk down upon, to be lashed out at. It's kind of not an uncommon thing. And so there's a connection point, I think, for me very easily with our female clients. And to be able to share stories of, I understand how that feels, let me share an example, or, this is how I moved through this, or this is how I was able to kind of move forward. I think, again, we have, Dr. Wayne is such an amazing person. When we have our own conversations about stuff going on in our lives, I just, I'll call Dr. Wayne and say, I need a GM nugget, give me a great master's nugget. And he'll just throw me a nugget and I'm on my way. So we just have this understanding between us, and we've got this connection. We know what makes each of us tick. And I think, to be able to see where people need that support, we can see that really easily when we first meet people. And like Dr. Wayne said, we go after the fear right away, because that's what really stops people in their tracks, what they're afraid of, what they don't want to move through because it's too hard. But being able to help them celebrate how far they've come and their successes, and, hey, you had something similar years ago and look at how you got through that. Let's talk about how you got through this other situation and see if we can apply some of that to this situation and move forward. So I think part of us is, it's just how we are as people, as male and female. And I think, again, for me, I'm really able to connect with a lot of our female clients who just have some really intense trauma. And along with that, Dr. Wayne has the softer, loving, caring, trustworthy side to show these women, especially who have been traumatized, that there are men out there that understand and they get you, and it's not all it's bad as you think out there. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Well,
I think
it does, but
we
one of the
easily
things,
complement each other.
and so there is a complementary, again, male and female energies, which are appropriate for the strategy and model that you're using. One of the things that I have learned to do over the course of the past 2.5, 3 years, since I started having these types of conversations, was my choice and use of words. Words I have found to be very, very powerful. And so now I have learned through my conversations, but even before I step into a conversation like this, like a recorded conversation, I am focusing my mind on specific words and how I want the conversation to actually play out in my own head, even before the conversation actually happens. Do the two of you go in, and you may not use the same strategy, but surely you know your own stories, you know the words associated with those stories, and you know how to build trust, and you know to tap into the fear. And so, how do you use words appropriately as you're helping people navigate through that uncertainty, working through the fear, yet building the trust and rapport? How does that work with the two of you? Your use of words.
Barb, you have something?
No, go ahead.
I'm gonna take Dr. Keith's idea of words and expand it to story. There's power behind story. Story goes back, way back, way back. And people have strong needs to tell their story. That's their way of being seen. Even if it is a negative story, a victimized story. Here's me as a victim. I'm getting attention. I need that attention. And well, Dr. Barb and I are experienced in hearing when those words become toxic. And we're very good at just putting out a question. And how's that working for you? And that destroys the edifice that people have about a negative story that's in some ways the only thing they have for people to see them. They said, well, it's not working really great. I said, tell me about the time when it was. And they'll go right back to it. They'll immediately say why that story came up. It's usually self-defense. They say, okay, go back to that moment and now create a different storyline. The narrative was going to end up, that you're saying now, is going to end up as a detour. So we're going to go back to the scene of the crime and say, what elements of light, what elements of joy were possible in that moment, but you didn't see them because you were probably clouded because of the fear. And it really is an awkward moment. And I will say this, Dr. Barb and I are superb at riding that wave of awkwardness. We don't jump in, we let them hold on to their awkwardness. Well, I don't know. Either one of us will just interrupt it. Yes, you do know. Or if you did know, what would you say? I mean, we keep them right at that precipice, and they always, 100%, all the time, come up with that ray of light. Now, what they have problems with is weaving that past that moment. How can that alternate storyline that they didn't know existed continue? And that's just the work of conversating, keeping that conversation going. But once you go back to the scene of crime and saying, you know, there's probably elements of light there you didn't see, changes everything.
Dr.
Yeah.
Barb, you're
And I would
smiling.
add too that, yeah, no, I would add too that, you know, being the therapist person that I am, I always talk about emotions, and words can elicit feelings and emotions.
Mhm.
And so that's the other thing, just kind of addressing those emotions and feelings that come up when people do use certain words. And like Dr. Wayne said, we're good at kind of, you know, culling out the toxic and the negative stuff that's coming out. And the emotions that are underneath that are kind of the key too, to really understanding, like, okay, this is, you know, all of these emotions are valid and they're real and you were feeling them at the time, but you know, we can move through those. If they don't feel so good, let's get to a place where they do feel good, you know, where you're feeling better using words. And the other thing I like to look at is energy. You know, where are we putting our energy? And a lot of the words that we're using, you know, especially if you're in a situation where there's been, it's been very negative, your energy goes towards this negative person, the negative words that were used. And so really kind of, you know, being careful about where all your energy is going. And again, that's always tied to emotions and how you're feeling about it. If you're putting all this energy out to somebody who's toxic or negative, it's draining. You're exhausted, you're tired, you feel weak, you know, you just don't have confidence. But if you take that energy and you don't put it out towards that other person or what's happening, then you're able to grow a little bit stronger, and you start feeling more confident. You start feeling like, oh my gosh, I can do this. And I feel a little lighter, you know, I feel more at peace. And that's a lot of the lightness is a lot of what we see with our clients. Once we start helping them shed these layers of words they're using or these emotions that are coming up for them, we can physically see them getting lighter, which is pretty amazing, you know, to watch their demeanor change. Or, you know, if we meet with them on a Zoom, they come on and all of a sudden they're smiling when they come on the Zoom, and you go, oh my gosh, you know, what's going on? How are you doing? And you know, we physically see changes in people. It's pretty amazing.
Dr. Wayne, follow up on that, or?
Yeah, catching people at that moment when their habit had been negative
Mhm.
and realize their habit can be both and negative and positive in the same moment, and getting them to see themselves in a mirror at that moment is very liberating. So one of the things I do on the side is have mindfulness classes with kids on Zoom. And I was teaching mindfulness in schools before the pandemic. The pandemic, couldn't do face to face. So a bunch of moms who kids were in my classes said, "Look, our kids are suffering something fierce. They've lost their peers, and we don't know what to do." So I said, "Well, I could try to go on Zoom, but I've never done it before. I don't know what to do." So I went there with that attitude of, "Here's my vulnerability, and maybe this works, maybe it doesn't." And I'm doing something in education, it's called SEL, social emotional learning. So I was doing some SEL with the kids, and a whole block of kids I have come from particular group that Dr. Barb and I are part of toxic divorces, narcissistic mates. And one of the problems with the healthier part of that partnership is, what do you do with the kids? The kids are like left stranded when the adults are squaring off. And because I come into it with a very positive attitude, the attitude of let's have some fun. I mean, I teach the terminology and the concepts of mindfulness, but I do it through games. So here's a kid who's just had a meltdown with mom that is in this negative kind of like a force field. And I just say, okay, that's what I'm receiving right now. And I go into the shtick that they know of. It's a very quick, it's a half-hour session. And I have 5 distinct things that we do. So we really move along. Within a few minutes, 10 minutes, they're smiling after having had a meltdown. It's the both end experience. And then, because I tend to be sneaky, saying, would you rate yourself right now about how wide your smile is on a 1 to 5, 5 high? And they say 5. And how was it when I first got you? And they'll say -10. And I said, what just happened? That question is the mirror that I'm talking about. It brings them to the present moment, their mindfulness. We do the same thing with adults, except instead of being 10 minutes, it takes 10 hours, but that's a different story.
A little
Well,
longer process.
I love the stories that you both bring here. And so we could probably talk for hours just on the stories themselves, because as you just said, it's in that story that our power, our lights, our energy comes forth. And so when you notice, and this is for both of you, but Dr. Barb brought it up and you just brought it up, Dr. Wayne, when that change happens, their energy changes, their demeanor changes, but something has to change on the inside. It just can't be a facade. I'm good for right now, but as soon as this Zoom call is over, Dr. Wayne, I'm going back to the situation or whatever that is. As soon as they're out of your presence, they're back in whatever environment that brought them to you. Something else has to be different. Something has to be empowering within them so that they could actually make real change and cement it. How does that part happen? Or do you not touch on that at all? Is it just about what's going on in the present? Surely it can't be.
Oh, Dr. Barb.
Yeah, so one of the things I think of as well is, we don't meet with people one and done.
Okay.
We meet with people over time, and we know time. Like years ago, I ran a parenting program. It was science-based. It was a family program. The whole family came. There were parenting classes for the parents, kids classes for the kids, and it was 12 weeks. It wasn't a one-time parenting class. It was 3 months. And we had dinner with the families together. We had activities together. 3 months, and we collected data for decades on this program, and we had significant changes because one and done doesn't work. So part of our magic working with people is, being there time after time. And I could share a funny story. This was actually one of my leadership clients that I talked to recently, and he said he was in this situation and he literally stopped and said, "What would Dr. Barb say about this right now?" And I said, you seriously said that? And he said, yes. He said, so it's almost like, when we work with parents, and especially if there's parents that are in a divorce situation where one doesn't like what the other one's feeding the kids, or, there's this, two different things are happening in different houses. I will always say to the parent, you do what you think is right. And you're planting seeds, right? You're not going to get the tree overnight. You've got to plant it, you've got to water it, you've got to nurture it. And you just keep doing that. So you keep, feeding the broccoli and give them the vegetables and have them help you cook in the kitchen. And all of those things stick, even if they're going to eat Fruit Loops 10 times a day at dad's house or at mom's house. It could be vice versa. You still do what you feel is important and valuable and is going to really teach them some healthy habits. And it's amazing over time that stuff sticks. So I think some of the magic in what we do is we're not one and done, and we do stay with people for a long time. Like I have clients I've worked with for, over a year, and it could be months and months and months that we're together with them. And that's where we really start to see the growth. And so that they can go off and they don't need to meet with us necessarily anymore. And again, they might say, what would Dr. Wayne say about this? Or what would Dr. Barb say? That's having some impact, I think.
Dr. Keith, you have such a good question, because when you're around positive people, it's easy to let your positivity out. But then you said, okay, now what happens when the Zoom call is over, when the session is over? And that can easily morph into, oh, my fears are going to lead me again, instead of whatever the opposite of fears are, the hope, the new me. And I want to echo what Dr. Barb said earlier about energy. When it's like what we do with our clients is open a door to their interior self. So there's an extrinsic way of looking at who you are, and an intrinsic way of looking at who you are. An extrinsic is, whatever the societal norms are, strength and money and, whatever those things of success are. But the intrinsic might be a sensitivity. It might be an ability to listen and hear someone that you couldn't hear before. That's not given validation in the extrinsic world. So I agree with Dr. Barb. Our sauce, our special sauce, is staying with someone until it's time to kick them out of the nest. And when we do kick them out of the nest, I'm saying it's coming. We're going to have the nest story next time. They know it's coming. It's not abrupt. Well, does that mean I'll never get to see? No. And we have clients back because I think I'm needing some more light now. I'm kind of dark. And say, okay, we're going to have some intrinsic time, but they're a guest in the nest. They're not going to stay there forever. And that's what's so juicy, because we keep a lifelong relationship with our clients. And this whole business of empowering someone, it's real tricky stuff. And most of the self-help modalities, in our opinion, just deal with the head. Learn these skills, learn these thoughts. And what we offer is that, plus companioning. We'll be with you until it's time for us not to be with you. So they know going in, their independence is what we're after.
Let's end this conversation on something empowering. So we've talked about a whole lot. We've talked about energies. We talked about addressing fear at the gate, which is, oh my God, I don't know how you do that. We talked about building trust and rapport. And we talked about the transformation power of story. So for those who are watching, listening to this conversation, I need both of you. Identify something that will change somebody's life today. Now, I'm asking a lot, but I typically do on the Envision Speaker Series, because it's those people who are tuning in who really need to hear something from the guest to say, I'm in this situation and I need a ray of hope. I need somebody to tell me to do something today, right now, that's going to change my tomorrow. I know it because I've been there. And every time I ask somebody to give, that empowering word or to-do item, I've come back. People have come back and said, yeah, I needed to hear that. I needed to do that today. So please, Dr. Wayne, Dr. Barb, leave our audience with something
Yes, I'm
wonderful.
coming back to what you asked before, Dr. Keith. Give me a word. My word would be connect. I think the source of fear, of anger, of worry, of anxiety, those negative energies, is separateness. I am separate than the rest of you. So then I got to build myself up. I really believe that we have the potential to be rays of light, but it's only going to happen when we connect with a higher source, with nature, with a smile, with our interior selves. We willingly say, I will connect. I don't know where it's going to take me. That energy might be too much for me to handle, and it's fine, but I'm willing to connect. And something that we haven't said, and I don't want to get into a long discussion about it, is Dr. Barb and I are very specific in taking on clients. It's an audition. Are you willing to connect is the question we ask. Are you willing to do the work? If you're not, we're not going to work with you. It's a lot of investment on our part. We don't mind if you're willing to. I'm scared. Fine. Can you be scared and connect? If they say yes, then we're happy. If they say no, they say, well, come back when you are. Connect is important.
Dr. Barb, your turn. Give our audience something.
Yes, so I think what can really move the needle for anybody is gratitude. And one of the things I like to do every day is write down 3 things that I'm thankful for. And what that does for me is that even if I have a really bad day, I'll do it at the end of the day before bed. It changes my mindset and I turn into a more positive, like, okay, the day was terrible. It was one thing after another. And oh my gosh, I just couldn't catch up. And it was, But at the end of the day, I can say, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful for, these 3 things. Sometimes it's more than 3 things. And when I look at it that way, boy, there's so many things I'm grateful for. I'm still here on this planet. I'm in good health. I have amazing friends. I have food on my table. I have a dog that I just adore. There's so many, I can walk and I have fresh air and sunshine. And I could go on. And when I start thinking about and writing those things out and saying them out loud, it really can change my mood and make me realize, gosh, things are moving in the right direction. Every day I have things that I can be grateful for. And I just think that's an important practice to have.
There's no better way to end this conversation than with those words. And so, Dr. Wayne, Dr. Barb, thank you for joining me in conversation. And for those of you who are out there watching and listening, I'll see you next time. Take care.